guys, welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast Coffee Break Sessions, the show where we cover foundational Treasury topics and questions in about the same amount of time it takes you to drink your coffee. This is your host, Alexa, and I'm joined today with Craig Jeffrey, Managing Partner of Strategic Treasure. Welcome back, Craig.
Hi, Alexa.
So today we're going to jump into a new topic around payments. So today we're going to take a look at some of the differences between payment messaging and payment movements. So let's start with, just a description of what payment messaging is. You want to maybe talk us through that, Craig?
Sure. So a payment message is the instruction to do something, instruction to move money and or information with the money to either a bank or through a network.
That makes sense. Could you give me an example of a payment message type that might be sent through that bank or that network?
Sure. So, a message, an example of a message could be, it could be an MT, which stands for message type through SWIFT. Some of the older legacy formats like an MT101 for a wire transfer or a real-time gross settlement transfer sent through SWIFT. So it's a message that says, please move money, use this type of network. And whether you use a traditional format like MT or you use like a PAIN format that's XML based, it can still be a message that says, here are the instructions on what to move, to whom to move, and how to move it. So it's an instruction that ultimately gets to your bank, whether it's ultimately through a network like SWIFT, or you might send that message directly to your bank through an FTP connection, for example, or SFTP.
So then what really is payment movements?
Well, that's where the settlement of value happens through the banking system. So in your demand deposit account or your current account, there's an increase in funds or a decrease in funds that are the result of this settlement between two parties. I owe you, or I'm buying something, I need to send something to you, and the money settles through the banking system to my account. So these can be accounts. The settlement can happen in accounts held between banks with each other, or it could be through a central bank that the banks have accounts with each other, so the money settles through those and ultimately to the end user's account. So, maybe you as a company, if you're sending, the money comes out of that account and to your supplier, for example, money goes into their bank account, but it passes through maybe a central bank or maybe between accounts held between these two banks.
So I guess what are some of the key differences really between the two, meaning payment messaging and then payment movements?
Yes. So usually we think about these as together, and I thought this was an interesting choice of podcast topics that you had, Alexa, where it's how do we make that distinction between a payment message and a payment movement? Because sometimes we might log onto a bank portal, we type in a wire transfer or some other payment, and we execute it, and it seems to happen fairly quickly, and so we think the message is the movement, but it's the difference between the two. And it's important to understand that there is a difference between the two in terms of processing time, exposure, compliance, et cetera. One is an instruction to do something. So a message is an instruction to move money, and the execution or the payment movement is doing something. So that's the bank moving the funds through maybe an in-country payment system or through some interbank structure or arrangement that they have. So it's instruction to do something and then the execution of that instruction.
I like the way that you said that, the instruction to do something, then the execution to do it. So then can you give us some examples of the message and then the movement, and in a way that really kind of shows the distinction a little bit? Maybe paint a picture for us.
Okay. I'll try to do it with two. It may require three, but one example is you may be a company that is a member of SWIFT. So you're a member of a network, and you connect to SWIFT because you might have, let's say you have 5 different banks or 15 different banks that you send instructions out on. So you give an instruction through SWIFT. You create a message that says, it tells your first bank or your second bank or whatever, send money from this account to this other account using this or that settlement system. So example, it might be you give a SWIFT instruction, do a wire payment using the U.S. FedWire system, and maybe you use an MT101 for a wire or maybe use a Payne XML message that says, here's what to send, who to send it to, and what actual payment rail to use. So that would be an example of there's the message. The message goes through Swift, goes to your bank. Let's say you're sending it from TD Bank to Wells Fargo. So the message goes to TD Bank. TD Bank gets it. They push out a payment to Wells Fargo. Maybe they're doing it through the Fedwire system, and they move the money between those two accounts. So that's the instruction sent in a Payne or MT message through Swift to your originating institution who settles it through, in this case, an in-country clearing system. That's one. The second one would be you're on a portal. You type in you want to move money. It could be a book, maybe not a book transfer, but some other transfer, a wire transfer, or some type of ACH, or not a real-time gross settlement or wire system, but some other method. And you give and put in all the approvals and information on that. So you've basically delivered a message to the bank, and they go through their approval process and then submit it. You're a little closer to the process, and that's why sometimes we see the message and the payment being conflated there, because they tend to happen in very close proximity to one another. Your message seems to execute the transfer, though there are some other steps that occur to make that happen, just like whether you're going through a network or to a bank.
So then if I do a quick wrap up of everything between the payment messaging and the payment movement, starting at the top, just a quick description of payment messaging. That was, again, just the instruction to move the money through the bank network. An example of that would be I'm going to say old school, because I feel like MT message type is a little bit older.
Legacy formats.
Yeah, legacy, or it's been updated since through Swift, or that's the instructions to the bank. And then the payment movement is really the settlement through the banking system, or really the instructions and carrying out those instructions. And then I think my favorite thing that you said is one was the instruction to move the money, and that was our payment messaging. And then the other was the execution to do something, and that was our payment movement. So that was really the line of distinction for me. So was there anything else that you wanted to add to that to kind of clarify between the two?
Yeah, I think just hearing you explain it back, I think the difference is bankers understand a lot of the, what occurs, I can't think of a better term, but in the cloud between banks and through the central banks and through the payment systems. If you're on the corporate side, you don't necessarily see all of that activity, kind of the magic behind the curtain. So, here's an example. So let's say you send a proprietary format directly to your bank for an ACH transfer. So I'm talking about the U.S. here as an example. They may translate that format to a Nacha format and insert it into the, through the Fed, through the ACH network to settle. So then you say, I've given a message, but they've translated that and then made the delivery to settle the funds. But the other example, too, just to think about, so if you send an ACH file to your bank, it's usually the bank will take that file. They may pass it on more or less directly, or they may combine it with other activity and put their own codes and other activities. So they're submitting things in batches, and then they push it through, in this case, the automated clearinghouse, along with other clients' files at whatever breakpoints they have. And so when you see that they're doing this, combining other activity, it's not purely just a pass-through. There's activity with risk. There's other items of compliance that go on, and exposure management that the banks will do. Do you have enough money in the account? Is it within the credit limits? And then they execute the transfer, and then funds are moved based upon that. And so in all those cases, there's other steps that the banks are doing. You're giving them instructions. Even if you're giving instructions in a format that might be what's used through the payment rail or payment platform.
Thank you for joining me today, Craig, on this podcast topic, the payment messaging versus the payment movement. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today. And Make sure to tune back every first and third Thursday of the month for a new episode. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to cover, you can send us an email at podcast@strategictreasurer.com. And thank you again, Craig, for joining me today.
Hey, thank you, Alexa.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.